are the frozen north, a land of vodka, bears, and grim and dour people. A land of winged lancers and empresses of ice. Of course, I'm not talking about Russia, I'm talking about Kislev, and let's look at what units they could have in Total War 3. Kislev is one of the main human factions, along with Cathay. Now, I have looked at Cathay, less at the army list, more at where they were historically in Warhammer, so we'll be doing that here as well. But we'll also be looking at some previous publications that Games Workshop did, and maybe musing about some of the units they could have. Kislev really has a few sources for information. One of them is a Black Library source with a book that they published. There was also the Warmaster game, there was also the Mordheim game with the Kislevite Ranger and the Kislevite Warband. In the trailer we do see some bears and we see Katarina herself, but what other units could they have? Well, I'm going to just talk about the units they had in various games and the models that they had in various games and muse about that. Kislev is a very dark land, it's to the north of the Empire, and the units that they would have in the Empire book would be the Wing Lancers and the Ungol Horse Archers. These should return in the Total War game as the Wing Lancers, and their Inner Circle version, the Griffin Legion, are important parts of Kislevite lore. Secondly, the Ungol Horse Archers, again, did feature in the Warhammer Empire books, and then when the little booklet was released in White Dwarf with the ally list for Kislev, they did have them present there. It also gave us a couple new units. In one I've already mentioned previously, and the second one we'll be talking about in a moment. It also mentions some of the gods and the various laws in Kislev. Kislev is a rather strange land because it's a deep land of ice and snow, of chaos, incursions, and other people who really party hard, but are also very dour and grim. They have a rather hard life, especially in Prague, a city that's become known for infestations of chaos and evil. At one point the entire city was burnt to the ground and rebuilt, just because of the taint, but the taint still stands, and Kislev, unfortunately, would be the first to fall when Archon starts his march south. Kislevites are humans, and the majority of them come from the Kurgan tribes, as well as the Dolgans and Kazakhs and other marauder tribes. So these people are descended from the very marauders that make up the bulk of Chaos armies. Not much separates them from their brothers of the harsher north, except one thing: their belief in different gods. There are major gods in Kislev, and the lore states that Ursun, the bear god, is the most important. Tsar Boris, the original Tsar who basically became a sort of avatar of the god because he had a big fight with the bear, and then after the big fight he basically became kin of the bear god, and he got a white bear called Erskine, a rather white polar bear. Of course this is very different because polar bears are not normally seen in Poland or Russia, not at least the areas that the game really references. Tsar Boris himself is basically Peter the Great from history. His weapons and armour were rather interesting. Boris carried the shard blade and protected by the armour of Ursun, so the bear god. He is mounted on Erskine, a rather big bear that he had a big fight with and sort of tamed. They are kind of kindred spirits, because in the middle of their fight they had like some chaos dudes to turn up, and so they decided to have like a peace treaty and fight chaos, and then at the end they were so badly wounded that they both passed out, and therefore they sort of had like a kinship relationship after that. Now, in some legends, it does say that he fought a big wolf pack instead of chaos. So there are a couple of stories that are very different depending on which lore you read about. Boris versus the Red Tzar. Note that Tsar Boris is the father of Tzarina Katarin, the Ice Queen, so the very famous ice wizard that we get in the trailer. Katarin is a rather strange character because she has elements of both. Tsar Katarin is a rather strange character because she has elements of both Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, and Catherine the Great from Russia. She is rather stoic and rather emotionless. Some say that she's, well, the Ice Queen, literally. So this was way before old Let It Snow days. This was a character that was in, I think, from 3rd edition, maybe even before that. If we look at the booklet for Kislev that was given in White Dwarf, it expanded on the Empire list by giving us a Boyar. A Boyar is a rather mid-ranged noble. They could have horses, they could either have a lance if they were mounted, a great weapon, or an additional hand weapon. They could have a bow, a pistol, and a handgun. They could have light armour, heavy armour, and a shield there. So they could have a horse with heavy armour. So this is one of the very few characters that could actually have heavy armour on the horse, which was strange because the Griffin Legion really did not have heavy armour on their horses. They relied on speed. So unlike the Polish wing lancers, who were mounted and had massive amounts of armour and weapon, the wing lancers of Kislev are rather spartanly equipped. Hand weapon, lance, heavy armour, shield. That's it. Even the Griffin Legion has the same amount of equipment, so they're just the inner circle, or like the most elite version of the winged lancers. But again, in history, the Polish lancers had a lot more equipment up until the Napoleonic period, when they were very lightly armoured and relied completely on speed, and they had a varitude of weapons as well at that point with lancers. I will note that they had the Glorious Charge special rule, which was an interesting rule which basically allowed them to be higher strength than they were, and it caused enemies to have a panic test. So this was pretty good, you know, for a Warhammer semi-armoured cavalry unit. This wasn't a monstrous cavalry unit, this was just humans with backbanners that made a load of noise. So it was pretty decent for a unit for having Glorious Charge. However, the Allied units really were just a get-you-by list. I think that they did this as a sort of like tasters to see if Kislev would be bigger than it was. It really wasn't. During this time, they experimented with a few lists, such as Dogs of War, Kislev, and I think they did quite a few of the Dogs of War units for a few editions more. But after that, they just appeared in White Dwarf, and the Dogs of War book didn't really get anything else. The Wing Lancers did continue to be in the Empire book, but the Horse Archers, I think, were phased out in 8th. But I might be wrong on that because I was never really an Empire player. So, what else could Kislev have? Well, if we look at Warmaster, which was their 10mm game that they tried for a while, this was during a period of time when Games Workshop would try new things, try new games, new scales with Inquisitor, with Warmaster. Some of them, these two didn't really hit it off at that point in time. I think people have a lot of fond memories of those games. Inquisitor was better played with 32mm miniatures. If you've seen Inquisimunda or the IQ28 games, they tend to be keeping the spirit of Inquisitor but using a smaller scale, so there is still a lot of fandom for the Inquisitor range, whereas Warmaster really has its fans, a bit like Epic, but less so than the other games. Going from that, in the Warmaster list, we did have war wagons which appeared in the Empire book, so they are just basically a copy and paste unit. Also, we had bear handlers. We've seen bears in the trailer, so I expect bears to make a rather glorious return for the Kislevites. Maybe they will be more elemental than they were previously. One is definitely fighting a greater demon, which should be a one-sided contest to the demon, in my opinion. Especially if I think it's Scarbrand. It might be Scarbrand, so if it is him, he should really decimate anything that comes across him, even the Tzarina. Maybe not in magic. Maybe he will, because he's got a lot of anti-magic buffs. Going from that, we look at the last possible source of information for Kislev units. This is of course Mordheim. Mordheim is in a lot of ways a vastly superior game to Necromunda. Now, you might have heard me go on about Necromunda and how awesome it is, but Mordheim was vastly superior because it enabled both hero growth, it enabled bog standard heroes, it enabled mercenary units, it enabled quite a lot, and the settings that it did give us in the end, it gave us Mordheim, it gave us the desert campaign, and it gave us the one in Lustria as well. It gave us a lot of fun in different settings using the same rule system, which Necromunda really didn't do and has never done. So that's why I would always support Mordheim if it came back. They have tried to bring something like it back with Warcry, but unfortunately, in my opinion, it doesn't quite hit the same mark, despite it being quite a fun and fast game. So, what could we have from Mordheim in Kislev in Total War? Well, there are some options here. I will start with the Kislevite Rangers, a sort of skirmishing group of individuals who are fast on their feet, carry bow and sword, or bow and saber, depending on how they're depicted, running through terrain, able to harass flanks or move quickly up the battlefield, forgoing armour for speed, and quick firing. Lastly, we look at the Kislevite Warband, which appeared in Towncrier 15. Towncrier was a magazine that they published additional rules in. Kislevites were published in one of these rule books. I will note that the Kislev Warband at this point in time was made by the Fnatic Studio, who had some major issues with their models. Regardless of how you feel towards Mordheim itself, you must appreciate that these were models of their time, and when the Fnatic Studio did have some sculptors, they weren't up to the caliber of either Forge World or Games Workshop itself, and a lot of these were basically one-time sculptor jobs, and in my opinion, a lot of these were not good. We have the Drazena Captains. Drazenas are another noble rank. Drazenas are the minor nobles, so they might be like distant relatives of important nobles such as the Boyars. They are nobles that might not have a lot of money but have a title and are sent off to do things, sometimes very unsavoury things, sometimes they just give them a task just to get them out of the way because they don't want to see them and they're an embarrassment. Drazenas normally had an inherited weapon, so this could be in the game with them gaining an automatic magic weapon when they're generated in the game. Bear Tamers. Again, I've talked about bears previously, but in Mordheim they had a specific individual called a bear tamer. He would have a bear. I think the link between bears and Russia and Poland comes from Wojtek, a bear that fought in the Second World War. Now, I've tried to find earlier incarnations of the Poles and the Russians having bears in the military service. I think there was one during the First World War, but it doesn't really get the same fame and glory as Wojtek does. But I don't know why that is. Maybe because Wojtek actually contributed in major campaigns, such as the Battle of Monte Cassino. We have Ursals. Ursals are sort of like sergeants. They're sort of like champions of units normally, and Ursals are rather stoic individuals. So perhaps when your Kislevite axemen or archers or rangers or whatever, the Ursel will still be there, even though his rest of his buddies have run away, standing his ground to the very last, fighting whatever comes his way. He's not going to surrender no matter what. Therefore, the Ursels will be the last stand of Kislev. That might be something that they could have done in the end times, but they didn't. Anyway, lastly we have the Stretzi. The Stretzi are, I think they're using a name that's very close to the Tsar's very secret police, which I won't go into. But they say that they are under the Prince Boyar of Indergrad. Now, Indergrad is not as bad as Prague with the chaos infection, but it's still pretty up there with the taint, let's put it that way. He invented the game Kislev Roulette, which is obviously Russian roulette. He had this group of handgunners and halberders, so they would have a special halberd which would hold the gun, the handgun, as they would hold it, so they wouldn't need, say, an additional person to hold the Peeps or a handgun holder. Basically, they wouldn't need that additional person, so they could just knock it into their halberd and they could fire the handguns. They are a sort of like halberd and ranged unit. So we've got halberds with their strength bonuses, we've got ranged attacks with their muskets or handguns, as they like to call them in Warhammer Fantasy. They called the weapon a Berdish, and it's a symbol of the Stretzi, now, or Streltsi, depending on how you would pronounce it. Streltsi are quite dour and stoic individuals, but they're also quite reckless because of the, Prince Boyar and his famous gunplay. I don't know who that's based on. I'm guessing it's based on a Russian prince or a Polish prince that had rather an eccentric personality, but sometimes these links are very hard to guess, especially if you don't know much history of the regions. We do have a trained bear again, with the bear trainers. They have a fearsome appearance. Of course, bears are pretty scary, especially big ones. Bear hug. When the bear would attack someone, he would hug them, resolving a d6 against strength. Now, I don't know how they would do this in Total War. Maybe they could have like a percentage roll where they would give the model attacking model against the bear a debuff for a while. They are fiercely loyal, so they won't run away. So I think that goes again to the whole Wojtek situation with him, always loving and being loved by his friends. So that's really all we have on Kislev. That's all the things that we know about them in Warhammer Fantasy Battle throughout the editions and Mordheim and Warmaster. I will note that there was a black library book called, I think it was called Griffin Legion or Wings of something, but when you look at black library books, they are canon depending on the situation. So that's why I've not chosen not to include that. That book also makes them more mercurial and more mercenary-like than they were in Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I will note that when you are expanding your territory as a Kislev player, you are probably going to have bonuses to snowy and very arid landscapes, and you are probably going to be able to use that as rather bonus in territory claiming and as a debuff for lands that are less hospitable to the people of Kislev. We don't know how big the Kislevite map is. We need to see that before we can say. Maybe they've introduced some of the other territories around it. I will note one thing though. Around there is a lost hold of dwarves called the Norse Dwarves, which might be an interesting thing for them to do at some point. I would really love the Norse Dwarves to appear in Total War, but if I was going to choose a dwarven faction to appear in Total War 3, you can probably guess which one I would choose. it would be the Chaos Dwarves, of course. Maybe we'll look at those another time. I will be doing a look at some of the demon lords, or greater demons, the named ones at least, that possibly can enter Total War as legendary lords. I will note that the way that they've set up the demons really don't control territory. They're raiders. They're rather strange, so I don't see them holding on to cities and stuff. I see them more like beastmen, or like the other races that have a raider mechanic. So them holding territory really doesn't feel right to me at all. So we'll see what we get with the demons and playing them. Okay, so that's all the Kislevite lore that I have for everyone today. I hope everyone's okay. I've been Trix, you've been you. Do take care of yourselves, and happy gaming, and bye bye.